bioinformatics at Stanford after multiple CS degrees, being a founder of a unique startup, reviving it from broke to seven figures, and then teaching DSN algorithms and subjects like HCI, publishing articles on quantum computing. I mean, this is
marketing, computer science, machine learning. There's just not a lot of people that's had some level of experience across so many weird, different areas of the world. And if I could do it, then anybody that got interested in it. You don't become, Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods or anything or Sidney Crosby.
What is the secret sauce?
An innate ability or I'm some kind of genius, but it's more like I will not stop trying and I just keep pushing and pushing. And I think ultimately it's really about kind of figuring out what you like and what you're good at. And for some people that could be going.
What I've observed, Sean, is whatever comes easy to people, I'm not saying that they don't have gratitude for that. I'm just saying that they just sometimes don't realize that it might be very hard for somebody else.
Because maybe I wasn't the top 1% in the world at theory and computation in my undergrad or the top 1% in machine learning during my master's degree. But the fact that I've now been kind of combining skills across different areas for the last 15, 20 years, I am probably in the top 1% of people who can kind of across the span of those things, bring those things all together.
Some advice for budding DevRels?
Infighting within DevRel world of no, it's this, no, it's this other thing. But really,
No, that's a totally acceptable answer. All-time favorite movie?
One that I always think of and I've watched a million times and had a lot of influence on me, probably because of the age I was when it came out, was Good Will Hunting.
If you could share some of the major life philosophies that you abide by.
If you want something to happen.
Welcome to The Secret Sauce, where we unravel the essence of success in all its forms and glory. I'm Ankit, but you can call me AK. Together, we will explore the diverse journeys and the unique secret sauces of remarkable individuals, focusing anywhere from their professional achievements to their simple acts of kindness. This season spotlights developer relations, which has a lot to do with the art of storytelling and making technologies interesting to many. We will dive deep with these DevRel experts and rising stars, sharing insights and laughter, unlocking strategies for success. So, if you're curious about the ingredients to their secret sauce and finding your own, you are at the right place. I'm AK, and this is The Secret Sauce. Let's get started.
Hey, Sean, welcome to The Secret Sauce. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great as well. Thanks for joining me here. Being an extensive consumer of your content and someone who deeply admires your work, I think it would make more sense if I actually introduce you. So let me start doing that.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Sean is very kind, helpful, and a joy to be around. His readiness to lend a hand is unwavering. He goes the extra mile to ensure nobody feels let down. Currently, Sean Falconer is the head of marketing and developer relations at Skyflow, where he spends a lot of his time thinking about data privacy and security. Prior to Skyflow, he led developer relations for Google's business communication product suite for almost 5 years. Founded Proven.com, a startup that he revived from near bankruptcy to a 7 figures revenue and profitability. And before this, he was a postdoctoral student in bioinformatics at Stanford. An engineer, a great storyteller, and a scrappy yet strategic DevRel, Sean has been programming and hacking on things since he was a kid. While in university, he competed twice in the ICPC World Programming Finals. He has published articles on a wide range of subjects including quantum computing, semantic web, computational geometry, string topology, and bioinformatics. He also taught classes in HCI, human-computer interaction, algorithms, and data structures. Having said all that, I again welcome you, Sean.
Thank you. It's it always, I guess, sounds impressive when you hear the Cliff Notes version of maybe what you've accomplished. But I think when you're in the weeds of it, maybe is a little bit dirtier and less, of a smooth line than what looks like when you're just kind of looking at the resume version. But thank you so much for that introduction.
Oh no, my pleasure to introduce you. And As I said, I'm a big fan of the content that you produce and the work that you have done so far, both in Google and Skyflow, and even before that, all that you have accomplished during your academia. I really absolutely love it. Yeah, Sean. So with that, the first question that comes to my mind is, what is your secret sauce? I mean, you have worked heavily uh, within the DevRel domain. I mean, DevRel is highly cross-functional, and you have worn different hats from time to time. You have touched on a lot of domains and subjects that are sometimes not even so interconnected. Bioinformatics at Stanford after multiple CS degrees, being a founder of a unique startup, reviving it from broke to seven figures, and then teaching DSN algorithms and subjects like HCI, publishing articles on quantum computing. I mean, this is a lot of stuff that might not be so interrelated. So, you know,
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess like I don't really think of it as, some like secret sauce or, insight that I necessarily have or something that's like, that I'm a special, unique snowflake in some way. It's just, I think it's more that I have just like genuine interest in a variety of things. And I ended up diving deep into like kind of whatever I was interested in. And I let that in my interest kind of guide my career rather than having this like fixed sight on, I'm going to accomplish this by the time I'm this age or in 5 years from now or something like that. I don't really, think of my career path and my goals that way. I do set goals, but I would say they're more, smaller, more achievable things than these kind of long things. Because I think so many things can change. Like every job I've had has been quite different than the last job, and I'm totally fine with that. And I think as you get used to kind of doing different things, it becomes less of a scary thing to do something new. And I also think that sometimes you want to be a little bit nervous about what you're doing, because then it's like the things that cause you to struggle where you feel a little bit nervous, those are the things that are like the highest value things to accomplish. If you feel too comfortable, then that's kind of where you get complacent. But I think ultimately it's really about kind of figuring out what you like and what you're good at. And for some people, that could be going like really narrow and become an expert in that one thing. But for me, I've always been more of a generalist where I know a little bit about like a lot of different things. And that's good for certain companies and roles, but it's not necessarily a fit for everyone. And I think the advantage of having that approach and what's worked well for me is that as a generalist with some knowledge across a lot of different things, you can kind of start to put multiple things together that maybe don't look like they fit. And I think that's why, if you look at my academic sort of career and where I published across a range of things. And that I think that's because I had sort of a unique perspective. Whereas in academia, like typically you're kind of forced down a path of going like really deep on one particular subject. And I think I was kind of like different than that. Like every degree that I took, I went in a completely different direction, from theory to AI to human-computer interaction to bioinformatics. Like I studied, some form of computer science for over a decade, but essentially jumped around every single time. But there's through lines between all those things, and you can kind of bring a unique perspective. And the last thing I say is that, it's really about, as you get comfortable with this, it's easier to make jumps to new things. It's like if you know a lot of like spoken languages, then learning a new language is easier. Or if you know lots of programming languages, learning a new programming language is easier because they're all sort of derivatives of each other. I think that's similar with skills. As you stack skills, it gets easier to kind of learn new skills and then apply them to new areas. And that has, I think, ended up making me, at least on paper, look like kind of a unique individual, because maybe I wasn't the top 1% in the world at theory and computation in my undergrad, or the top 1% in machine learning during my master's degree. But the fact that I've now been kind of combining skills across different areas for the last 15, 20 years, I am probably in the top 1% of people who can kind of like across the span of those things, bring those things all together, like marketing, computer science, machine learning. There's just not a lot of people that's had some level of experience across so many weird, like different areas of the world. And I think that is what is, essentially made me unique. But it wasn't by design by any means. It's kind of just something that I steered into my interest, and it's led me to this path.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a perfect answer to start with. So, Sean, So the concept of natural ability or innate talent, some people call it unfair advantage. That's very interesting to me. Things like genetic predisposition, physiological factors. Like for example, Michael Phelps has longer than usual arms, which is perfect for a swimmer. Neurological wiring,
Mhm.
psychological traits, different learning styles that people have. I'm very interested in these things personally, and I just wanted to know if there's any such analysis that you might have done for yourself and you think might be your asset in having some sort of advantage in the things that you have done in the past or the things that you currently do.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. Like, kind of like going back to what I said at the beginning there, like, I don't know that I have like a secret sauce or that I have necessarily any sort of like innate gift that I was born with. I mean, that'd be great if it had been the case. I think I've like, kind of worked hard and through repetition and exposure gotten to a place where I've, developed skills that are valuable. But I think that, even when I was doing the ACM ICPC programming finals, programming competitions, like I'm part of the only two teams in Eastern Canada, like basically east of Ontario, that have ever made it to the World Finals. So that looks like, that I'm part of some, elite programming class or something like that. And I think I am a good programmer, but I don't think that I have skills that are necessarily unachievable or outside the norm. It was just something that I got interested in and I trained really hard to get good at it. And that's why I ended up starting like programming clubs at the universities I was part of, because I felt like, if I could do it, then anybody that got interested in it could do it. So if I could just teach people or show people like, hey, this is like this fun thing that you can do that is not just about, memorizing a bunch of stuff in class. There's a whole world of computers and technology and programming that exists outside of the classroom. Like if I'm interested in it, you should be interested in it too. And, I felt like I could train them to get to a place where I got to. It wasn't necessarily that I had this like innate ability. There are certainly people that I competed against that were really, really good and naturally talented, but I could compete with them. I felt like mostly because I just practiced and like outworked them. And I think that has been, a consistent thing. So I think that if I did have some special ability, I feel like it's more learned, like maybe from my parents, or my parents are both like hard workers and stuff. I think I've always been very determined, and I think that makes me good at solving problems. So it's not so much like I have an innate ability or I'm some kind of genius, but it's more like I will not stop trying, and I just keep pushing and pushing until I can push my way through the problem. And I think that is something that is very valuable in the workplace, because there's, especially as an entrepreneur, there's just like no one else to rely on. And sometimes you just have to figure out, how do I unblock myself? And I think that's really the true difference between really senior people within an organization and more junior people. Is senior people know how to unblock themselves. They just will not allow themselves to be blocked. And I'm very much like fit into that for whatever reason. I don't know where it necessarily comes from. And I guess the other thing that I find kind of easy, or has that always been natural to me, is just sort of self-organizing my time and prioritizing tasks. And, when I was teaching, sometimes it was hard for me to relate to students that would come and want like extended time on like assignments and things like that. Cause I never submitted anything late in my life, because I was always just like, that's the deadline, I need to have it ready. Like I just like, that was it. And I felt like if you weren't able to hit those deadlines, like that was because you mismanaged your time and stuff like that. And I think it's just something that has naturally like flowed for me for whatever reason. And that carries over into my personal life and stuff as well, where I just organized in that fashion. And I don't know that I have any like secrets or anything like that. It's just kind of how my mind works. And it's helped me like, I can get a lot of work done in a short amount of time because I'm able to sort of self-prioritize, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I would just want to add one thing here. Sometimes what I've observed, Sean, is whatever comes easy to people, I'm not saying that they don't have gratitude for that. I'm just saying that they just sometimes don't realize that it might be very hard for somebody else. And a lot of what you're saying, it definitely there will be a lot of people in the audience who would feel like, yeah, since he's there, he kind of feels very naturally towards like he might have feel like it comes to him very naturally. He might feel like that, but for them it's like, it might be difficult. But yeah,
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think like maybe some of these things do come natural, but I don't feel like they're unachievable things by anybody who's sort of determined. I think that's the thing that I want to point out is that like, I think there's a tendency for sometimes for us to culturally, especially in the West, want to say like, I don't know, some like sports team or whatever that does amazing is like kind of pin it on an individual of like some unique thing that they had. But I think that sometimes discounts the hard work that they put in to actually get to where they are. Sure, if you're a professional athlete, you have some natural athletic talent, but you don't become, Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods or anything like, or, Sidney Crosby without also combining that with a ton of effort and hard work. And I think it kind of discounts that as when you just say like, oh, this person was born with this talent or something like that. And it also makes it feel unachievable and kind of puts down the idea that, a regular person could achieve those things. And I don't think that's necessarily true for a lot of this stuff. Maybe you're not going to, dunk a basketball from the foul line, but there are things that I'm sure from a work ethics standpoint you could mimic and learn from someone like a Michael Jordan to essentially be able to achieve more than what you'd be able to achieve if you didn't put in that effort.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's just sometimes when you have some sort of like sometimes when things make sense to you naturally, for example, somebody might just touch the piano and it makes sense to them without much professional training. It's just they start at a high cliff. And then from there, it's, they can grow even higher and higher without that much time that would take to reach that kind of a ceiling, And other person, he might have he might hit the ceiling again and again, and then he might have to train himself again and again. Maybe take some explicit coaching or something. But it's great to hear that your own perspective and your own experiences. Because the show itself, I call it the secret sauce because I really want to establish what the secret sauce is for the people and how there are sometimes gaps in what people perceive to be the secret sauce, but what actually might be the secret sauce. And I would want to leave the conclusion. I would want to have the audience decide at the end and leave the conclusion to them. So this is why the kind of questions that I'm asking is trying to gauge your perspective and your part of it. So with that, the next thing that I would like to touch upon is some interesting experiences while growing up that you think you might have had that prepared the backbone of your passions, interests, and skills. Because you highlighted that you followed your passion, not necessarily any sort of hearsay, or you were not so influenced probably by, let's say, your colleagues or your peers or the fellow students. As far as I understand, you're mostly directed by your passions and interests. So I would like to know, if there's something that specifically comes to your mind, the stories while growing up, some interesting experiences that you think might have formed the backbone of these passions that you have had.
Well, I think that I was always interested in math and science growing up. So I definitely leaned to that side. And, speaking of sort of, innate abilities or something like that, I felt like that stuff came easier to me than necessarily language. I did fine. I did okay in English classes and foreign languages and stuff, but I wouldn't say that it was something that I necessarily enjoyed, or I had to work harder at it than something like physics or something like that, where I felt like it just kind of made more sense to me from the get-go. And when I was in high school, I started to get really into computers, and it was kind of fortunate timing because it was also around the time that the desktop computer was becoming a big thing that was being introduced into people's homes. And I had grown up with computers like a Commodore 64 and stuff like that. So I'd done a little bit, but it wasn't the same as when the internet became a thing and we were starting to connect with the world. And that was really exciting for me because I grew up in a really small town in Canada that was quite rural. And, as somebody that was maybe more, interested in sort of science and academics, even though I played sports and stuff, you felt a little bit disconnected from maybe what other people were interested in. And suddenly to be able to connect with people all over the world that were, like-minded or had similar interests was like an amazing experience. It like really shrunk the world, and I just became absolutely obsessed with it. Like at that time, it was all dial-up internet. And I forget, we had, 24 hours a month of internet or something like that. But it was free between midnight and 8 a.m. So I would get up at like 4 or 5 in the morning before school would start to take advantage of, 2 to 3 hours of free internet time at that point. And like, I learned the basics of programming, and I worked on websites, and I started actually getting paid to build websites for businesses and things like that. So that was kind of like the early like entrepreneurship piece for me, and also like using technical skills and sort of connecting with the world. And I was really fortunate as well that my teachers in high school, they were also transitioning to this world of like being a connected world. Like we literally went from learning on old school typewriters to those getting like, I don't know, like put in a dumpster somewhere and being replaced with computers. And then expecting the typewriting teacher that's been there for 40 years teaching people how to typewrite to be the computer teacher who had never ever used a computer before. It was like crazy. So unfortunately, I had like some teachers that were really like recognized that I was good at this stuff and was interested in it, and gave me a lot of opportunities to like leverage those skills, like set up computer labs at the school. I eventually, in my final year of high school, they actually created a special class for me where two classes a day, I would just spend like setting up computers, installing software, debugging stuff, helping teachers, running network cable, all that sort of stuff. And they actually gave me a key that would open up any locked door in the entire high school. So it was like a skeleton key for everything. And I could just like walk into a classroom and start like ripping out cables in the middle of the class and stuff. And no one questioned it. No one even like, we were like, well, what's this kid? And I was 17, but I looked like I was 12. Like, what's this like this small child doing here? Just like, reconfiguring the network. But they were really supportive, and I think that helped really like me explore that interest. And then it just made me more and more sort of interested and passionate about it. So that was really the like start of it. And then I went on to study computer science, and in computer science, in the school, originally I was interested in doing like hardware because that's kind of like what I was used to doing in school. Is like you would tear apart PCs and stuff. But hardware is a lot more about like electrical engineering and designing like, chips and hardware. And I think when I started to get into that, I realized like, oh, this is not as interesting to me as like actually like programming, as I learned more about programming, and sort of let that take me in one direction. And then I got into like more of the math in theory side of computer science, like writing proofs and stuff like that, algorithm design. And I really enjoyed that for a while. So I just kind of like dove into different things. And I got more and more abstract for a while. And then I kind of went away from the abstract and becoming more applied through my PhD. So it really all started in high school with the interest in computers. And I was fortunate to have a place where people harnessed that rather than kind of tried to put me down for it.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I'm so amazed listening to all this. Thanks for sharing all this, Sean. So, Sean, I deeply believe that self-exploration is one of the biggest adventures in my life, and I love it when I hear other people's self-exploration journeys. And we have touched quite a lot in that regards already, but just wanted to ask, like, if throughout your journey so far, what kind of, I mean, your experiences are so diverse, and yeah, it's clear that you might have taken keen interest on some sort of developing some sort of self-awareness on what works the best for you and how to solve these problems. So how could you share with us like some best practices and habits that you might have developed over time that now supports your personal and professional growth?
Yeah, so I think for me, like one of the things that I really try to prioritize is exercise. It's kind of just, I feel like I spend so much of my professional life as well as like personal life kind of like thinking in thinking mode and making decisions, that the time to like go and exercise and do something like purely physical, it's almost like it gives my brain a vacation for a little bit, because if you're doing something so intense or with intention, that you don't have time to kind of think about like these other things. So I really try to prioritize that. As I've had kids, I've had to move my sort of time to do that earlier and earlier in the day, which forces me to wake up insanely early. But I still like make it a priority for me, regardless of like how tired I am. So I'm willing to sacrifice sleep in order to kind of get that in, because I feel like it sets me up for the day, and I feel sort of like a little bit out of sorts. And sometimes my stress level goes up as well if I don't have that. So even when I travel as well, I always try to prioritize it. And I can be on a flight for a really long time in shifting time zones and stuff like that. But I know, even though if I don't feel very good, if I just make myself do it, I'll feel better and kind of like resets my body and resets my system. So that's something that I think I've built up. I've continued to do for a long time. And that, for me anyway, works really well.
Awesome. I mean, there's so much literature on the effects of exercise on brain and how it increases productivity and longevity.
Mm-hmm.
So glad to know this. Awesome. Switching gears a bit, I would like to talk a little bit about developer relations, aka DevRel. So Sean, before we dive deeper, I would like to ask, how do you see DevRel as a whole, as a function that you're building for the different companies?
Mm-hmm. I really see DevRel as like an umbrella, kind of like social sciences is an umbrella of multiple disciplines. Mm-hmm. I see DevRel as a similar thing. And I think this is like where you get in, because it is an umbrella, this leads to some of these like, I don't know, like infighting within DevRel world of like, no, it's this, no, it's this other thing. But really, it's an umbrella of things, which is why you kind of have different flavors of it for different companies. But essentially, I see it as consisting of 4 different areas, which is like developer marketing, developer experience, developer education, and developer success. And that essentially supports the full developer lifecycle. So any company or DevRel function, or even people within a DevRel function, can be focused on different areas of that developer journey, depending on like what the company needs are or what they think they need. And bigger organizations will probably support that full journey. But in an early startup where maybe you only have 1 or 2 people on DevRel, they'll probably focus on maybe one area in particular, and then or like a set, 1 or 2 areas. But it's hard to do everything. Because basically, if you try to do everything for everyone, you're going to just do kind of nothing for anyone at some point. So you kind of have to pick your battles. But, and I think generally a lot of people, or, some people have kind of just like a too rigid, too small a view of what DevRel like can be and should be. And I think that causes more problems for DevRel as a whole than necessarily like helps fix the problem. Like you can become very evangelical about like, no, it's only this thing. It's only community led, open source, like has to be part of the engineering function or something like that. But a lot of that, I think, matters less than is essentially the DevRel function aligned with the business goals, and does the business value the functional area? Because if it doesn't, then what you end up doing is spending most of your time trying to justify your existence, which is not fun for anybody, regardless of whether you're in DevRel or some other function, right? Like you don't want to spend all your time trying to like justify why you exist and fight for resources. It's not fun. Like you much rather focus on, having an impact and doing real work. And I think the other thing that sometimes leads to challenges is that we sometimes forget within DevRel, and at least in like now the other thing I'll say is DevRel consists of multiple jobs too. Like a lot of times as an outsider, you think like, oh, it's only advocacy or, developer relations engineer, or whatever you want to call that, the particular role. But there are, community managers. If you have bigger teams, you can have program managers. You might have technical writers part of the team. Like it can be a whole spectrum of different roles. But I think one of the things that can lead to challenges for DevRel area functions is that sometimes we forget too that we're paid by a company, and then we represent the business. Like we need to represent the community. That's important. But at the end of the day, the person who signs your check is the company, is the business that you work for. So you need to also keep their interests in mind as well. So, and always be thinking about like, how am I adding value to the organization? So it's really this like, balance between the community needs as well as the company needs. Both are important.
I've been saying wow and wow while you were answering this. I mean, I could not have done a better job at this. You have defined it in such a beautiful way. Love it, really, absolutely, love it. So, yeah, so moving on to your experiences developing this function in different organizations. So earlier you spent, I think, 5 years almost at Google as a DevRel, at, I think, different levels of DevRel. And then now you're at Skyflow. So how did so before you and I move to all that, I would like to ask, like, how did your efforts prior to Google shaped you into being a great DevRel?
Mm-hmm. Well, it might be debatable whether I'm a great DevRel or not, but I think like a lot of people that find their way into DevRel, like once they like learn about what it is or advocacy or something like that, they realize that they've actually been doing that job in some capacity for a long time. They just didn't know what it was called. So even going back to when I was doing the programming competitions in university, like I was excited about that. And I was like, if I'm excited about this, of course, other people would be like, yeah, excited about it. Like I wanted to share my excitement. And it came from like a really authentic place. And that's why I started these like programming clubs to try to teach people how to compete in these competitions. And I ran local competitions and stuff. And that was really like the beginning of I think like being a developer advocate or being in sort of like a DevRel capacity. And then when I did my own company, there's certain skills that you have to learn from doing your own company around like marketing, positioning, messaging. Even though we weren't building a product for developers, pitching VCs, all this kind of stuff that is valuable also in DevRel or really any like leadership role. But it taught me a lot more about like content marketing, which sometimes, depending on what you're doing in DevRel, might be a value add. And then also during my time in academics, like teaching, like that really, you had to educate people, and I really enjoyed that. So I was doing, developer education at the university level, teaching different things as well. I also did as part of the programming competition. So a lot of these skills I've been doing for a long time before I ended up joining Google. And I joined Google after I left. I like ran my company for 7 years. I took a step back, stayed on as an advisor. We sold it about a year later, but during the time when I kind of took a step back as an advisor and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next, I was mostly looking at pure engineering jobs, and I got several offers for engineering jobs that I was excited about. But Google, I was originally referred to as an engineer, but when they saw my background, where I'd like written, I blogged for a long time, I'd published papers, I'd spoken at conferences, been an entrepreneur, they said like, hey, we think you'd be a great fit for developer relations. And I was like, cool, like what is that? And because I had no idea what it was. And then when they explained that it was like an engineering function at Google, but you're sort of the external representation of Google engineering, and there's an educational part of it. And sometimes you're, generating content and stuff like that. I became really interested in it, and it felt like a really good fit, which is why I ended up moving away from pure engineering. Because through being an entrepreneur, even though as the CTO and technical co-founder of the company, I was so used to doing so many different things and like wearing a lot of different hats that I was a little bit nervous about taking a pure engineering job and feeling like it was too like constrained for me. And I think DevRel allowed me to kind of flex more muscles than just my engineering skills, because it is very cross-functional. It's really, you're kind of in the center of this Venn diagram between like product, marketing, and engineering. And I like that because that's kind of like where I've been living for the last like 7 years with my company.
Awesome. Yeah, I've heard some earlier podcast where you did mention how why you chose DevRel and what didn't excite you about the traditional engineering roles. I think you mentioned something like unit testing and integration testing, those kind of things. And writing a lot of production code is something that you don't really enjoy as much.
Yeah, I really like sort of like building proof of concepts and kind of thinking about like the future of our product. So I think there are engineering roles that would be a really good fit for me, but I think the kind of day-to-day, like running sprints and stuff is less of a, I could do it and I think I would be decent at it, but it's kind of just less of a good fit from a personality standpoint at this point in my career.
More about some DevRel recipes, the secret sauces in there. So does anything ring a bell? Anything comes to your mind where you might have felt that aha moment, like, oh, this growth experiment or tactic really worked, or
Mm-hmm.
or this one might have failed, but the improv was hugely successful. Anything that comes to your mind, be it community engagement funnel, those
Mm-hmm.
tofu, mofu, bofus,
Yeah.
or yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think, so I would say that like one mistake you can make, and this is, I'm sure, true for lots of different like functions, but is trying to take something like a recipe or like a collection of tactics that worked one place and then like wholesale
Mm-hmm.
apply it somewhere else. Like people can get really like comfortable with their tool set and they don't want to
Mm-hmm.
kind of like add new tools to their tool belt, and they're like, oh, I'm just going to like, apply this hammer over here because this hammer worked for me in the past. And I think that's a mistake. Like you need to kind of be focused on the foundations. And I think the like foundations really come down to understanding like why you're there and why the company pays you. Like, what do they think that the value is that you bring? And
Mm-hmm.
if that there's a misalignment, then maybe it's not the right fit for you. Or you can do some, education and effort to see like, can I get them sort of to believe in something else? But if you don't, then you get back to that same situation that I talked about earlier, where you're kind of just going to always be butting heads
Mm-hmm.
and trying to justify your existence. So you need to like understand like why am I here? What is the business trying to accomplish, and how can I help them accomplish that thing? And then
Mm-hmm.
align sort of strategy and plans based around the overall business objectives. And I think if you do that, you'll be in a good place in terms of like, longevity of not, hopefully not, getting laid off at some point, especially with the downturn in the market. But you need to align your vision of developer relations and where you think you can bring value to like what the company thinks. And that can be a lot of different things. Like I think the types of things that I was doing from a strategy and execution standpoint at Google was very different than a lot of the things I'm doing at Skyflow. And if I worked for purely open source community led product, I would probably be doing different things there as well. Like for me, I just see these as like these are just different problems, and I like to solve problems. So I'm going to go and approach the problem as best I can from first principles and figure out like how can I like solve this thing, applying like different strategies or different plans and tactics, like what's going to make sense. And you can experiment and measure, but I think the key is kind of try to take a first principles approach to it, and then leave some room for experimentation, and test some things out and like measure along the way. And a lot of times it's hard in DevRel to tell like a full story of the impact that you had. Like you could go and run a workshop or something like that somewhere, and or even speak at an event, and someone could have seen you there and then later sign up for your tool or software, but you might not actually know who that individual is. So it's hard to like do source attribution. This is a common problem with any marketing, this sort of marketing part of a company. But like, so if you get too sort of fixated, or the organization's too fixated on like what leads or like paid accounts come from DevRel, and if you can't do source attribution, then you need to figure out, how do I tell a story of the impact that I'm having from an influence standpoint. So like when I was at Google, some of the things that we did was we would run, workshops and things like that. And we would know what, in this case, we would know what companies were actually there. And then we could look at the next like 90 days to see, do we see an increase in traffic and engagement that correlated with those companies. So you can kind of tell like a pipeline influence story there to help justify the value that the thing gave to the company. And then you can also, of course, tie in like qualitative metrics and things like that. But you need to try to tell a complete story with whatever metrics or measurements you can put in place the best that you can to show that you're actually bringing value that is aligned with the overall business goals. I think that is like the most important thing.
It's awesome. This is awesome info, Sean. Thanks for sharing again. I mean, there's so many great points in there. Uh, so, so personally, I've noticed people talking a lot about the first 3 months after joining an organization as a DevRel. What do you
Mm-hmm.
think? Like, is there some sort of framework again, or some sort of general thing that that you follow? Like, how do you take inputs from the team on what exists already that concerns you as a DevRel, and then finally how do you jot it down all and then assimilate to finally come up with a short-term strategy?
Yeah. So I would say in a startup, I mean, it depends on what you call a startup. Some people were calling Stripe a startup when they were like thousands of people and making millions of dollars. So, but I mean, certainly in a smaller stage startup where, maybe you're the first DevRel hire or maybe the first of a couple, I think the only guarantee you have with a 30, 60, 90-day plan is that it's probably going to be completely wrong and you're going to go in a completely different direction, because it's just things are so variable in a startup. And that's really the fun part too. But I think that there are some things that you can, from like a strategy or planning standpoint, like get a foothold. I think the key things to focus on at the beginning is really meet people, understand what they do, help them understand what you do as well, and try to find easy wins. Make an impact early while you're looking towards the big picture. And then additionally, one of the things to keep in mind at a startup is the timeline to impact is short. So the advantage of a startup is that basically everybody, like let's say you're a 100-person startup or even like a few hundred people, everybody has the opportunity to have company level impact, which is awesome. Like that's why one of the reasons that is fun to do a startup, right? Versus if you're at a company like when I left Google, there's almost 150,000 full-time employees. Hard to have company level impact there. Not impossible, but difficult. And so you have the advantage of having company level impact, but that also means you're very visible. So if you're, not contributing at the level that they think you need to be contributing at, then that could, be very negative for you. But so I think you need to kind of find some of those easy wins early and start to try to have an impact and be a real team player. A lot of it, I think, is about, coming in with kind of a yes mentality at the beginning, like say yes to things, start contributing before you start, pushing back and saying no, because it's all relationship building at the beginning. Like sometimes you need to give more in a relationship at the beginning to build trust and have people feel like you're contributing and you're a valued team player before you start sort of, trying to push back where necessary and so forth. And I think there's the other thing I would say is that just like DevRel is at its core about building relationships, and we focus a lot on building the community relationships, but we also need to be building relationships inside the company and build essentially our own internal champions across the organization. Like you want product to see value in what you're doing, engineering see value, sales to see value, marketing see value, because then if at some point in the future people are questioning, what is DevRel doing? Like, why are we paying these people? Then you hopefully have multiple stakeholders in the room saying like, oh no, like these guys are great. Like Ankit did this for me and they did this thing. And you have multiple champions supporting the value that you bring. And I think that's really important. Like we can't afford to be siloed off in our own little world, focusing solely on the outbound community. We also need to be making sure that we're bringing value inside and people understand what that value is and that we have those internal champions.
Can't agree more, Sean. So DevRel is relatively new if you compare it with product management and traditional engineering roles. And it's very, very cross-functional. And it could be very ambiguous too generally speaking. So, and it's kind of fascinating that the measure to impact the measure, how hard it could be to impact the measure of DevRel, but still, like there are so many practices that over time has been established to do so. Having said all that, I would give you a hypothetical situation. Let's say we are optimizing for just revenue at a startup, and community building is one of the key components that the startup wants you to focus upon, which is generally a long-term game. But then how would you, in this specific context, how would you go about showing some measurable impact in the short term?
So you're saying that the company is like has a community-led program and that's what they want you to focus on. But you want to be able to figure out, how do I show some financial impact to the company in the short term?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think there's a few things that, you could do. In the long term, of course, you'd want to look at how many people from the community are, lead to essentially like revenue dollars or closed won opportunities within the company. And it depends on what your sort of like sales funnel is. Is this like, are people going in with a freemium model and then converting, and then you can look at that sort of like measurement of conversion? Or are people going from freemium to like a sales engagement? And then you could, of course, look at, team up with your sales ops or marketing ops people to look at the final dynamics of how many people from the community are sort of involved in those conversations. And then you can get essentially like a pipeline influence measurement. But in the shorter term, I think the things that you can look at is, the things that you're sort of tactically contributing, whether that be content or maybe like a demo. You can see at how can this help the sales team essentially win more business. So if you build a demo that's either for the community or maybe some referenceable source code, or you're using at an event, like those are great assets for the sales team to use as part of, or even the marketing team to use as part of the marketing and sales customer journey. So you should make sure that you're sort of creating visibility for those things as well. And then those also become, pipeline influence things. And that's also, I think, like how you help create some of those champions, because people see, oh, like, Sean created this thing and I'm using that to help me close and win more business. Like nothing makes you more loved than, a salesperson relying on you to close more business and generate more revenue and more money in their pocket. Right. And then I think that similarly, you can look for other ways to help the sales team. Like sales enablement is always a big part of like a sales journey or like sales training. And I think a lot of times, sales teams need people who can explain things to them in a way that, they can understand it and articulate the value of it. And I think a lot of people in DevRel are uniquely positioned to do that, because so much of our job is taking complex things and trying to make them understandable. Your audience shifts a little bit. It maybe is not instead of the developer audience, it's the sales team audience. But I think there's ways of contributing to product marketing as well as like sales enablement, where you can use some of your sort of translation skills from technical to maybe not so technical as part of the sales enablement journey. And then the other thing is keeping a pulse on what's going on in the community. Like those can become value add like use cases, or you might even be at sort of the forefront of what's going on ahead of someone having a sales conversation, or those things coming on the radar of the product team. So that is a great opportunity to be contributing from like a feedback standpoint of like, hey, I'm hearing these different things that, we might want to think about how we can address this use case, or maybe build a product for it. How can we monetize it? All these types of things you can be helping identify for the team on both the sales and the product side as opportunities.
Fantastic. Okay, let's switch gears again, Sean, and have a quick rapid fire round. It's like a fun segment that I want to introduce, where I would be asking you a bunch of questions that you can quickly answer without thinking much. Okay, so let's start. So 5 things that come really easy to you. Any 5, personal life, professional, anything.
I guess, so we mentioned prioritization. I think I have like discipline around work. I can like, I don't know, the best way to describe this, like hyper focus, like when I become, I can kind of get in the zone and go really deep, which is both a pro and a con, I guess. But I think that's easy for me. And then I think that I have a natural empathy, I guess, for people who are trying to like learn and understand things. And the last thing is that I'm not afraid to make hard decisions that come along in business. Like sometimes there's just things that are not fun that you have to do, but I'm not I see that as my core responsibility, that sometimes I have to make those kind of decisions or have those types of conversations.
So we have hyperfocus, discipline, empathy, not afraid to make hard decisions. So these are four. Is there anything I'm
Well, and
missing?
I think prioritization was the first one you mentioned.
Prioritization was the very first one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, let's move on to the next. Three things that you enjoy doing the most.
Spending time with my family,
Okay.
exercising, and then I think talking to people about technology.
Awesome. Founder, DevRel, or teaching at university, which one would you prefer?
Oh, this is tough. Probably, I guess DevRel is more consistently fun.
Awesome. Okay, big tech or startups?
Startups.
Okay. One tech trend that you're most excited about?
It feels so I don't know, like everybody's going to say this, but definitely generative AI and LLMs. But I will say specifically for biotech, I think that what's going on in the world of like drug discovery is really, really like exciting. And I think it's going to have hopefully a really positive impact on the world. And, we can get excited about our coding assistants and so forth, which are cool. But like the fact that we might be able to significantly speed up the go to market for drugs that can be life-saving for people is, I think, a lot better for the human life than probably anything else I've been seeing in the space.
Awesome. Totally agree. A book that you'd recommend to anyone?
I feel like the one that I always talk about is Range, which is by David Epstein. It's How Generalists Triumph in the Specialized World.
Oh, cool. I haven't heard about it. I would definitely go through that. A pop culture icon that you'd love to have a tech conversation with?
And stuff. I guess I'll say Reid Hoffman.
Okay.
I don't know if he's a pop culture icon, but
no, that's a totally acceptable answer. All-time favorite movie?
I think that's an impossible question to answer, but I will say one that I always think of and I've watched a million times and had a lot of influence on me, probably because of the age I was when it came out, was Good Will Hunting.
Oh, one of my favorites too, for sure. So if you could create one app or tool to address a global issue, what would that be?
I think something to do with healthcare, but I guess it's not necessarily global because in I think a lot of like the healthcare issues that I have like top of mind is things unique to the United States, like the fact that so much of your profile is kind of locked away. I think those have been fixed in other parts of the world. So I think that would be a good starting point, is kind of just be able to make it easier to share information in the US healthcare system. But yeah, I think I would have to give it more thought, but I think something sort of health tech, healthcare related would be great.
What's the most underrated skill you believe every developer advocate should have?
So this is, I think the skill that every developer advocate should have is empathy, but that's not necessarily the underrated skill. I think the underrated skill, which I've touched on a bunch so far, is around building internal alignment and champions. Like we get hyper focused on community and we kind of forget that it's the company that pays you your salary.
What's one accomplishment that you're very proud of, particularly proud of?
I think you mentioned this during the introduction, but I think being able to save my company from basically like to the point where we were not like paying ourselves or paying anyone else, and we had to fire everybody, lay everybody off, and actually revive that into something that we eventually sold, was probably one of the biggest accomplishments of my life. And then I think that like a second one professionally would be some of the work that I've done at Skyflow, kind of rebuilding some of the marketing organization there and stepping into a role that I've technically never held before and being able to do that and seeing the impact it's had for the business.
Wow, this is the very reason why I like you a lot, and I've invited you in the very first season as one of my very first guests. Okay, so again, coming back to a series of questions for you. We talked about creating internal champions. So I think that opens up the pathway to talk a little bit more about the buy-ins and funding internally. So let's talk about some of your challenges that you have faced in the past during your tenure at Google and then your time now at Skyflow?
So I think, first of all, the challenges at a company like Google versus like the challenges of a company like Skyflow or the size that we are very different. A big company is more political, more big company problems that I just don't exist in like a smaller startup, because you're basically unburdened from the bureaucracy that exists in larger companies, larger organizations, and you can just execute. And as I mentioned, you can have essentially company level impact. But at Google, I think that as you become more senior, and in order to be successful there, a lot of it is figuring out how can I get people to sort of buy into what it is that I think we should be doing. So you really, a lot of times, like your like customer almost is, if you want to think of it in like from a sales perspective, is internal stakeholders. It could be like the product lead or the engineering lead, and you need to figure out, how do I make these people believe in like the product direction or the investment that I believe that we should do. And they are essentially the gatekeeper to like unlocking the resources that can have major impact for whatever you're working on. And then if you have major impact, then that leads to, other opportunities, like you'll get better projects, and where like, I think like success sort of follows success. So if you've shown that you can successfully identify like a problem, a solution, lead that thing end to end, deliver impact, then it's going to get easier the next time that you do that. And that leads to, promotion and, higher salaries and all that sort of more influence. But building up sort of that sphere of influence is really tricky, especially at the beginning, because it's a lot of like building trust and building those in champions. And I think the things that worked for me when I was doing that was, is sort of not necessarily starting with the main stakeholders, but starting with people that could help sort of back my position. So I would start with friendly people and like people I was friends with on the engineering or product side, and kind of like, hey, what do you think of this? And that comes a like safe sort of battleground for hearing initial like pushback and figuring out how to navigate that. And then from there, you get better at sort of forming your arguments and understanding like what people might be thinking. And then you can bring some of those people basically to the meeting where you're sort of propositioning the powers that be. And now it's not just some solo person trying to make to push for this idea. You have like a coalition of people that are supporting you, and that's much more impactful, because ultimately the decision makers, usually they're too far removed from like, the customers or the users of the product. So they're going to go like, hey, Jim, or, Sally from BD, like, what do you think of this? And if you already, that person's in your pocket, like, it's a lot of politics. Like if they're in your pocket, then they're going to be like, oh yeah, I heard this from XYZ or whatever. And then that helps sort of influence and shift the room to your side. And then I think the other really important thing, and I made this mistake at different points, is you also need to make sure that you understand what each individual person, what value they see, like what is important to them. Because what is important to you, like for me, as originally as a developer advocate at Google, like I'm thinking about the developer experience. I want them to have a great experience and stuff like that. And it's not to say that a product or engineering lead doesn't care about developer experience, but like that might not be the most important thing. Like what they care about is, I don't know, growth or revenue or something like that. So you need to figure out, how do I position the value that this brings to unlocking more of these things that whatever their North Star is. And you need to basically position your argument and the potential impact rates on their worldview and their perspective. And that's really, really important. Now at Skyflow, I don't really have those kind of challenges, because essentially I was brought into a very senior position. I report directly to the CEO. So it's not like I have to jump through all these hoops, and he has a lot of trust and belief in me. So it's like really just a conversation, if that, or I just like execute on things, right? So then the different challenges that we have at Skyflow as a business is more around, we don't have the luxury of being like a household name like Google. Like Google, certain things are just easy. Like if you want to run an event at Google, people just turn up because they want to go to a Google office, or they want Google involved, or you submit a talk to a conference, they want Google on their list of like speakers and be able to use the logo to attract other people. So it's just like when I was at Stanford, I don't think I had a single paper rejected while I was a student at Stanford, because it's like people just trust, oh, okay, this person's from Stanford, so it must be good. And I think you get a similar like sort of effect at Google. Like people are just going to show up for your talks more than other people. And you have to, at a smaller company, you don't have that luxury. So you have to figure out like, how do I like create awareness, or how do I, get a talk accepted, even if I'm not a household name. And I think there's different strategies you can do there. Like I think you can team up, for example, with a company that is a household name. So then you're sort of riding their coattails to some extent of being able to be, participate on a panel with these name brand companies, and it kind of helps bring your company to the same similar level and create visibility and so forth. So there's different tactics that can work there, but the challenges between big business and startup are very different.
Great. Thanks, Sean, for being so open about this all and answering in such a open manner. I was not expecting anything less from you, actually. So thanks for keeping that up. Okay. One interesting thing. So you have a blog post on your website, building a developer program strategy, and you mentioned DevRel CEOs there. Can you explain what your vision is with this concept?
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, the point I was trying to make with that was that we have so many developer tools companies now, and there's also more and more of a like focus and emphasis on developer experience. So is it sort of time? Like a lot of times you see the CEO of a company, maybe they come from a product background, maybe they come from engineering, business, and there's been different shifts. Like there was a period of time when it was very much the CEO of like tech companies was sort of like someone with a business background. And then it shifted to someone who had somewhat of, some marketing background, because a lot of it became like, can this person like get up in front of, 1,000 people and hold the room and like really captivate them and really like sell like the vision of the company. And then I think we shifted into like the engineering leaders of organizations like Jeff Lawson at Twilio and so forth. So now with this, so many API first companies, developer tool companies, such a focus on developer experience, is it kind of time for this era of someone who came from a DevRel background to being the CEO of a company. And actually, Cassidy Williams, she's not the CEO, but she's CTO of a company, and she has, an advocacy background. So that's an interesting shift. She kind of I went CTO to DevRel. She went DevRel to CTO. And I think we'll start to see more of that, especially as like DevRel's technically been around since the 1980s in some capacity, but it's really only probably been in the last like 5 to 10 years that you see it more prevalent across the company. And that probably also correlates with the growth of developer tools companies. So I think naturally we'll see more people in the C-level or the C-suite that have sort of that, some, DevRel experience or something like that. But it just felt like if we're going to emphasize this stuff, who's better positioned to kind of understand that world than someone who's like lived and breathed it? And I think that eventually we'll see more like DAs like branch off and start their own companies in some capacity, where they're kind of bringing in that lens of being the zeroth developer and really understanding the importance of community building or developer experience and developer education.
So, Sean, what are some of the ways to bring in the community? Folks from the community during your product's beta testing stages, or during the product development stages, or early access days? And how do you determine who the right audience is, and what are the best channels to reach them?
Mm-hmm. So, I think that it can depend, like many things, in terms of like bringing in community. If you built up an established community, then a lot of times there's people within that community, especially if it's a product they really care about, that want to be, part of an early access program, because they want to be on the forefront of the community. They also want to be able to contribute in some ways to the product direction. So when I was at Google, we were mostly sort of partner led. where we had hundreds of partners, and they formed sort of our developer community. So any partner was a company that maybe had anywhere from a handful of developers to like hundreds or thousands of developers, and they were building on top of our APIs. So I basically within that, I found like the smaller partners that were really trying to leverage our APIs as a competitive advantage and like a core part of their product. They all really wanted to be part of early access sort of private beta programs because they felt like it was an opportunity for them to be ahead of everybody else, but also contribute from a product standpoint, like actually have their feedback matter and have a direct line to the product leader. So I think there's different ways of doing it there. I think open source historically has done a great job with this, just the nature of anybody can kind of contribute. And so if you have sort of a healthy open source community, that can really help with sort of defining these different programs and giving people early access and rewarding people for the contributions they make. But in terms of targeting, I actually spoke on a panel last week about this. I think there's different ways of figuring out like who the audience is and who to focus on. If you have lots of data, and that's sort of the advantage, I think, of open source or product-led growth, is that it gives you access to more data. Like if you have a freemium self-serve model, then you're just going to have more people signing up. It creates potentially more noise, but you're just going to have access to more data. And you can use the data to help you understand what's going on, like what subclass of the people who sign up actually, become a paid customer or use the product the most or something like that. And if you don't have that, then I think you have to talk to people and build a hypothesis, just like you would with trying to build a product or something. You have to look at, who are you winning for customers and talk to those folks, and who are sort of like built, you can work with like product marketing teams and so forth to try to understand like who's your ideal customer profile, who's the technical people involved in those conversations. Like how do I find more of those people? It's basically like a matter of kind of creating these like lookalike audiences of and then once you understand that, then you can sort of form a strategy and plan around how do I go find more of those people? Where do those people hang out? Are they involved in other communities? Like you don't necessarily need to build a community from scratch. A lot of times you can leverage other communities that already exist. Like I'm heavily involved in like Snowflake and AWS communities, for example. So I don't need to go and build these massive communities myself. If we are naturally aligned with a lot of the people that use those products and tooling to Skyflow, I can just go leverage the work that these companies have already done and built these massive, like they're going to have far more reach than I'm able to get to at this point. So it's a way to sort of scale beyond yourself by leveraging some of the work that other folks have done, if you think of it that way. But we kind of lucked into it at Skyflow in terms of like really understanding who our core customer profile was early, because one of the early conversations that was like founder led, which is, the case with a lot of startups in the early days, was with a company called Nomi Health. And we were talking to Bo Hartman, who was the CTO and co-founder of Nomi Health. And he happened to be the former CTO of Goldman Sachs. And at Goldman Sachs, and I believe a prior organization, he had actually built internally a similar technology to what Skyflow had built. So when he started to hear what it was we were building, he actually started kind of laughing. He's like, recognized these people took this thing that we had built, spent like a lot of engineering resources trying to create and maintain, and they built it as a service. And he became one of the first customers. And because he was basically like, I built this twice, I don't want to have to build it again. It's too much of a pain in the ass. So he became that early customer, and he's kind of like, we formed a lot of hypotheses around that of his sort of profile. Let's go find other, Bo Hartman's, other CTO issues and stuff like that. And that's informed a lot of our strategy. So it's not always going to work out that way, but it really comes down to I think a combination of having conversations and understanding what's going on in the data, and then forming hypotheses and test those things.
Fantastic. So a lot of times I knowingly keep my questions a bit generic just to extract more and more information from you. And every time you end up surprising me by making the answers so bang on, so precise and yet so concise. That's some special talent you've got. That's awesome. So some advice for budding DevRels. So you yourself, I think, hired one. You took a lot of time in that process, I guess. And So just wanted to know, like, so this time more specific. So in your specific context, what were you exactly looking for? And then how did you create that framework or that environment to hire that specific kind of personality that you were looking for?
Mm-hmm. So I think it also kind of comes back to like your prior question of understanding who your audience is. So like who's in your community, and then ideally you want to hire someone I think that can speak authentically to that community. So if your community is like, I don't know, like hardcore C++ developers and that work on like compilers or like operating systems or something, and then you bring in somebody whose experience is primarily front end web applications and JavaScript, like that's probably going to be a misalignment of their skills, and it's going to be hard for them to authentically communicate with that community. So for us, where we are a lot of times essentially trying to target fairly senior engineering leaders within an organization, because as a data privacy platform, you need someone who's fairly senior within an organization to understand both the sort of technical challenges, have sort of the authority for change, and also understand the business impact that not having a good like privacy solution could have. That you need somebody that probably is fairly senior in their career, like either has actually held an engineering, like a real engineering job in the past, versus, you know, other people in DevRel. Sometimes they go directly from college into DevRel, and I'm not knocking that. I just mean it really comes down to having an alignment between what you're trying to do with your community building efforts and who your targets are. And I think for us, because we're dealing mostly with experienced senior people, you need to be kind of have people that can match them at that level. Can they generate content, a talk, video, or even jump on a call with somebody and sort of match them at the level that they're at? So that takes somebody that has some experience. So when I was looking, I was really looking for somebody who'd worked as an engineer in the past, and primarily for us, we're like, I think a good alignment is people who've come from a fairly heavy data background, because we're dealing with a special type of data, which is sensitive customer data, or PII. And I think it's an easier leap to understanding what a data privacy vault is and sort of how it fits into an architecture if you've worked with data in some capacity in the past versus maybe other parts of the stack or something like that. So those are some of the sort of signals we were looking for. And then there's all the normal sort of developer advocacy things that you need to be able to do. Can you tell a story? Can you explain technical concepts to a variety of different groups? Can you write, readable, intelligible code? But I think the baseline was, what is your engineering experience? And then also, what sort of technologies have you worked with, and are they a good sort of jumping off point for something like Skyflow?
Great. So we talked about short-term strategy, but I want to ask about the long-term this time. So the 5 years game plan. Can you give us some concrete things that you take into consideration for this long-term strategic plans that you make? And I mean, you can take examples from Google and Skyflow both again, and then tell us like how do you think about this long-term strategy? And I think you're you're one of the finest to answer this thing, because at this level, you definitely, think you have, and not just this level, the kind of things that you have touched, you're so interdisciplinary and cross-functional that I think I would be very happy to ask this question to you about long-term strategy.
Yeah, so I think that on a personal level, I don't really put like I said earlier, like a long-term strategy. Like I'm going to accomplish this by, this date or something like that. I have, goals in mind and things like that, but I think it's more fluid than that. In terms of company or function or something like that, I think it's a little bit of what I've used is more sort of setting the vision for where we want to go. So at Skyflow, we use a V2 MOM model, which comes from Salesforce instead of an OKR model. And a lot of that is about like a
V2 MOM.
V2 MOM. So it stands for vision, value, methods, obstacles, and measures. It has some similarities to OKRs, but there's a little bit more about like aligning the vision and the strategy. And you usually we create one like within our, the marketing org that I lead every 6 months. And it kind of lays out the next 6 months, but I also have a long-term vision for where I want the company to be in 5 years. Like, how do I want people to be thinking about it? So it's kind of like this goal setting stuff, and we revisit that and adjust it and so forth. But I think it's a lot more about helping, like communicating to the team where we think we need to go as a company or as a, organization, and aligning on that and having them sort of buy into this vision. And I think that's important too at like a fairly early stage startup too, because people, so much of it's about being aligned with the mission. And that's another exciting part about being at a company that's like smaller, is most people ideally are there because they believe in the mission and the vision of the company. And it's kind of up to you as a leader to help articulate and shape that vision and make people understand what that is, so that you're all sort of aligned and marching in the same direction.
Awesome. Sean, to conclude our discussion, the final question that I would like to ask is, if you could share some of the major life philosophies that you abide by and how they have helped ensure that you stay true to yourself and sometimes to your goals and your work, your career.
So I don't know if I describe it as a philosophy, but I think that I'm a big believer in, you kind of need to create your own opportunities. Like, if you want something to happen, no one's just going to do it for you. You have to kind of make it happen. And that kind of goes back to what I was talking about, like about being able to unblock yourself. If you want to start a company, or you want to, exercise more, or eat a certain way, or whatever it is, or in a company world, like, accomplish certain things, like no one's going to kind of like hold your hand to do those things. You just have to like force yourself to do it if they are important to you, and figure out what is it that enables you to get there. And there's, you can, I think different things work for different people. There's things that work for me that wasn't necessarily going to work for everyone, but it really comes down to you sort of taking the reins and making that thing happen. There's also, I think, a lot of people that tend to be sort of waiting for something, and sometimes they're happy to follow someone that has like an actual like vision and goal in mind. Like few people kind of step up to make things happen. So if that's something important to you or you believe in, like there's lots of ample opportunities to kind of make that thing happen. But I think it's up to you to step up and have it happen.
That's fantastic answer, Sean. I love it. Again, I don't know which answer of you I love the most. It's like all are so equally awesome and amazing. Thanks for taking out time for this awesome conversation that we had. And there's so much that we can talk about. I would definitely want to keep inviting you again and again to the show. But for now, it's a goodbye. And for all of you folks, Sean has a lot of fantastic content on his website, his blog, and all his existing podcasts that he himself hosted or he's a part of, that are all there on his website. And I would also add his LinkedIn, Twitter, and all the other social infos on the description of this video. So feel free to follow him and learn from him. With that, it's a goodbye for now, Sean. And I will see you again soon.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime. Okay. Thank you.
Cheers.